webinar by WSI. WSI offers a complete package of employee and applicant screening services, including drug and alcohol testing, background checks, and other key verification and assessment services. As a trusted partner of major U.S. and international-based companies in a wide variety of industries for over 25 years, WSI exceeds expectations by offering innovative services, superior customer support, and a personalized approach to meet clients' research, investigative, and background check needs. Today's presentation is entitled Hair and Urine Testing, How to the Best of Both Methods, and presented by Bill Current of the Current Consulting Group. Bill Current, the president and founding partner of the Current Consulting Group and the publisher of the online Ultimate Guide to State Drug Testing Laws, statedrugtestinglaws.com. He is the author of 10 books on substance-related issues, including the popular title, Drug Testing. Consulting Group is a leading provider of drug testing policy writing services and works with companies to help them optimize their drug testing return on investment. He administers the annual Drug Testing Industry Survey in the United States, now in its 16th year. It will be our pleasure to hear from Bill Current.
Well, thank you. Welcome to everybody who is on today's webinar. I think we've got some great information for you, and I encourage you to present your questions to us in the Q&A section of the screen in front of you. If there are any questions we don't get to today, we will follow up and make sure we get answers to you. Either we'll send them to you directly or you'll receive them from AWSI. I'd like to thank AWSI for sponsoring today's webinar. They have been sponsoring webinars now for some time, and this is the list in a series of webinars sponsored by AWSI. So thank you very much to them for bringing this information to people in the drug testing industry and those who use the services of drug testing providers like AWSI. We're going to be talking today, as Sammy mentioned, about hair testing and urine testing and how to combine those into a single program to really get the most out of your drug testing investment. So, testing works, right? It says there on the first slide. All the drug testing business dating back to the late 1980s, I've seen many different approaches to trying to prevent drug abuse, trying to help people with drug problems, trying to prevent young people from using drugs, etc. But that this proved to have the greatest impact on drug abuse is drug testing. In the workplace, it's in treatment, it's true in the military, it's true in virtually every setting. The most helpful deterrent to using drugs is typically because you may be motivated by some other force, not wanting your job, not wanting to lose your family, not wanting to, get sick. But drug testing, especially for people who have a problem, who are prone to using drugs, drug testing has proven to be a powerful deterrent and very effective way to identify people who have a problem. And for drug testing, they see the results in the bottom line. Acts that lead to workers' compensation claims decreased, theft in the workplace, violent episodes in the workplace, product, all affected in positive ways by drug testing. Lots of different ways to do drug testing. Nowadays, back when I first got into this issue back in the late 1980s working at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, there was data as to whether or not companies should be doing drug testing. Where testing fit? Did lawyers have the right? Was it legal? Was it accurate? Would it really achieve the type of results that a company was expecting to get from drug testing? Those are all open issues back in the late 1980s and throughout part of the 90s. Questions have all been answered in the affirmative. Drug testing works. So really so much a question of whether or not you should do drug testing. From a standpoint, even from a humanitarian standpoint, drug testing is a good move. It's now a matter of which drug testing method should you use. And I work with companies that do hair testing, oral fluid testing, instant oral fluid testing. When any one of them is a question versus not doing anything at all. It's really a matter of which testing method is the best, but a question of which one is best for you in your circumstances, given the expectations and the objectives that you have with drug testing. Nowadays, there are lots of different options, as I just rattled them off. But one method, they want to look at more method. And the method that you're thinking of, or methods that you're thinking of, you need to be able to answer these three questions. The method accurately detect the drugs that we're going to be testing for as a company? And is it to use this method in the places, the states where we conduct business? And generally, will this testing method help us as a company achieve our drug testing or drug-free workplace objectives? Now, very early days, really out there was what we would refer to as traditional lab-based urine testing. That is 1990, especially the first part of the 90s, okay? It was lab-based urine testing. This is the method that's required under the DOT regulations that companies were doing. Then instant urine testing. Back then, we used to call it on-site testing. Now there's, more politically correct ways of putting it, point election testing. But what it comes down to is being able to get a rapid result, an instant result, with minutes of collecting a urine sample with a disposable single-use device. We saw the end of hair testing, oral fluid testing, and of course nowadays a lot of buzz about lab-based oral fluid testing because the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, is in the process of developing and supposedly on the verge of actually releasing publicly the first of regulations for lab-based oral fluid testing. So we see a lot of buzz there. But, these are really the methods. You don't really talk about blood for typical workplace drug testing. Some not even permitted for workplace drug testing. There are other sort of non-bodily fluid type testing methods, area exam and things of that nature. But really what we're talking about is urine testing either through a lab or with an instant device, testing through a laboratory, of course, and then oral fluid testing, which is done either with an instant result device or lab-based testing technology. That's, of course, the lab-based oral fluid testing is what DOT is looking at putting out regulations for. Now, when different testing methods, you look at things like the window of detection, the sense behind it in terms of the accuracy, comparing, say hair testing to oral fluid testing to urine testing, to talk about hair testing and urine testing specifically. And one of the things that all stands out about hair testing is the window of detection. It's by far the widest window of detection, up to 90 days, compared to 4 days usually with typical urine testing methods and a day or two with typical oral fluid testing methods. Again, it's not a matter of which one is best because of good. It's a matter of which one is best for you. Urine testing is by far the most popular testing method, but over the last 5 years specifically, but slightly the last 10 years, we've seen encroachment into urine testing dominant of the market for drug testing. And so where it used to be in the 90% in terms of market share, now much lower than that. Not much lower, but it's in the low 80s to mid 80s in terms of market share compared to hair testing and urine testing, oral fluid testing. There is, however, a trend, and this is a popular thing, we're going to talk about it extensively today, combining different testing methods, particularly hair and urine, into a single drug-free workplace program. So not just picking over the other, but using one for the circumstance that fit it best and other for other circumstances. And so companies are using this very successfully, and I've got some great statistics coming up towards the end of today's presentation. So stay with that. But in us, as companies are seeing an increase in their return on investment from drug testing by looking at combining different testing methods, and urine, or hair and oral fluid, in this case, hair and urine testing. So we're going to talk about today. That's hopefully what you're going to come away with, some information that will help you understand better and perhaps learn how you can combine hair and urine testing into a single program to get the best of both methods in a single drug testing program. Okay, so let's begin with sort of the basics of urine testing. The vast majority of people who are on today's webinar, and there's been a great turnout for this webinar, a lot of people on today, you probably know the basics of urine testing, but let's just set the foundation in place so that we make sure that we're all talking about the same thing, okay? First of all, urine testing, and we're talking specifically the workplace, but this applies to other markets for drug testing as well. Testing is legal in every state. You know, fluid testing, it's not legal in these 3 states. We talk about hair testing, there are some limitations depending on the type of state law we're talking about. Urine testing, legal in every state. There is no state that prohibits urine testing. It may restrict when testing can occur with any other testing method, but no state specifically prohibits drug testing. The only testing method, currently permitted by the DOT, though, is lab urine testing. As I mentioned, base oral fluid testing regs are in development, but only urine testing through a certified laboratory, certified by SAMHSA, is permitted in compliance with the U.S. Department of Transportation regulations. Okay, outside of that, outside of the DOT regulations, then you come under the state laws. And I mentioned if you're a unmandated company, you're not regulated by DOT, for example, then you have the choice of doing lab-based testing or point of collection, instant result urine testing. And then you're only held back by states that don't permit point of collection testing. And there are a few, whether it's oral fluid or urine. But you have flexibility with urine testing. There's technology and there's instant result technology. Okay? There are many types of certified laboratories, as I mentioned. Those are the laboratories that DOT requires, and that's probably the most common certification for drug testing to choose from. So that's another advantage of urine testing. You have a variety of choices. It's a common testing method for the workplace, so you're going to find consistency. You're going to find lots of case law in support of urine testing, particularly lab-based urine testing. So there's sort of a history there. I wouldn't go so far as to call it a gold standard. I think the smart people in the drug testing industry, I mean the real smart scientist people, would still probably prefer to blood as the gold standard because of its accuracy from a scientific standpoint, but of course not very practical and not even allowed in many states. But beyond blood testing, urine testing would be by most common, and well, not the gold standard, a standard that exists and has existed for a long time that a lot of companies have a comfort level with. You can test for virtually any drug with urine. The same can be said with hair as well. But with urine testing, you find a lot of different variety panels to choose from. There are collection procedures, screening procedures, confirmation testing, which is very, very common from state to state. State drug testing laws punt on these procedural issues, the laboratory issues, and defer to 49 CFR Part B, the SAMHSA regulations, or they may just refer to the deregulations, which of course are governed by Part 40. So you see that sort of consistency from state to state when it comes to urine testing. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of case law, especially in the early days of drug testing, related to the science and the technology of drug testing. So there's a lot of legal disability for urine testing because there's many years, 3 decades worth of case law that has, for the most part, especially since the early 90s and beyond, been very, very favorable toward urine testing, especially when done right. By right, we're talking about, using accepted technologies at cut levels that are consistent with federal cutoff levels, using confirmation testing, GCMS, MRO verification, et cetera. Now, there's some down points to urine testing. Really not many when you think about it. Some refer to the yuck factor involved in urine testing. It doesn't come into play unless you're collecting the urine yourself and you're not, a medical professional or somebody who's trained to do urine collections, you may find this yucky. Invasive, I won't argue that point because drug testing is invasive. It's an invasion of one's privacy. But I think we can also argue that one doesn't have a lot of privacy when it comes to breaking the law, and using illegal drugs is breaking the law. So a little of that goes away. But when some companies, there's a culture that would be somewhat perhaps uncomfortable with the collection of a urine sample. Under certain circumstances, especially under the DOT regulations, you have observed collection requirements that are in place. And, observing somebody voiding a sample of urine can be obviously very uncomfortable unless you're a professional, and most that would be done by a professional. And testing is susceptible to a variety of cheating methods, iteration, adding something to a sample, or switching a sample with another sample. And I did a webinar just a few weeks ago on drug test cheating. In part, I went through all kinds of websites. I mean, there are literally over 1 million websites that offer advice or products to help somebody cheat on a drug test. The majority of it, almost all of it, is geared toward urine testing, but there's anything on hair testing. One of the advantages of hair testing and oral fluid testing. I will note, despite the efforts of the quote-unquote cheaters and those who help people cheat, there are myriad ways to combat cheating on urine drug testing. The laboratories are very sophisticated when it comes to detecting and being able to identify samples that are unfit to be tested, dilute samples, etc. And so cheaters are out there. They've created a cottage industry for themselves, and urine is susceptible or subject to a lot of cheating efforts. The laboratories, the collection sites, especially if you're dealing with reputable companies, providers, AWSI, you're going to be taking precautions, are going to be taking precautions for you that really make it very challenging for people to cheat. But it's important to point that out because it's not so much the case with hair testing. Now, based urine testing follows a process, okay, and it's a multi-step process when it's like testing. This was true to whether we're talking about urine, hair, or fluid. If you're talking about instant or urine testing, then you see there are fewer steps to the process, especially if you're collecting the sample on site with employees who have been trained to administer the test. You're getting out some of the steps that we saw in that previous slide that would show collection and then store it or having it shipped from the collection site, et cetera. And even within the collection, I have another slide I'm not using today that shows all the different steps that take place at the collection site, and then the numerous. So with testing methods, you sort of bypass that. Hair testing actually provides some relief from some of those steps as well, as I'm going to show you a little bit later. But as you can see here with point-of-collection urine testing, using those instant result, single-use disposable devices, you cut out some of those steps. And so for some people, there are advantages to urine testing because you have flexibility using an instant or a lab-based device. However, I will say the vast majority of companies that do urine testing still prefer to use a laboratory. And that's true with that's what people like about hair testing. It's still a lab-based result. Now, here's basics, okay? We talked about this a little bit earlier, but an initial test screens for a variety of drugs. An initial screen is positive, or what some people would refer to as non-negative. Then it's going to be confirmed using a different testing process in the laboratory. Gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, GCS is the most common or popular one to use, especially with urine testing. You'll find that it's often GCSMS or LCMSMS, where they have a variety of confirmation methods that sometimes come into play here testing. But with urine testing, it's usually GCMS. And if that confirmation is positive, then it'll be verified by an MRO, as you can see in that last bullet. But the combination of the screen and the confirmation together, and then with the verification by the MRO, it's very, very difficult to end up with a result that's not accurate and that puts an employer in a position of taking based on an inaccurate result. Now, let's get some basics about hair testing, and let me tell you where we're going with all of this. I'm going to show you some basics about hair testing now, and it's going to lead into a discussion about how you can combine the two methods into one program, and then I'll share some very interesting statistics for you from some companies that have been doing a combination of urine testing to comply with the DOT regulations, hair testing under separate company authority, and results that they've been getting with it. I think you're going to find it quite fascinating and perhaps a very strong argument in terms of combining the two testing methods. Now, one I'm not going to do today is really get deep into the science of either one of these testing methods. I'm not a scientist. I am capable of explaining it. It takes a little bit longer to do it. But there's something on the science or the technology side of hair testing or urine testing that you're not sure about. Include one of your questions, okay? Because we can answer those for you later, or we can refer you to AWSI and they can answer those questions for you so that you have some comfort level when it comes to understanding the technology behind hair testing in particular. Is exactly what it is. It's taking a sample of hair and testing it through a very sophisticated scientific process to determine whether there are metabolites of a drug in the hair sample. You take a drug, when you ingest a drug, it enters the bloodstream and it's broken down into metabolites of that. So typically what's referred to as the parent drug, the ability to detect the parent drug, and a metabolite of the drug. So the parent is like the drug itself, but the metabolic breakdown of that drug that remains in the bloodstream or is disseminated through the bloodstream into other parts of the body, like a saliva sample, or in this case, a hair sample. Okay? So you're going to screen and confirm, just like you do with urine testing. Any samples that screen as non-negative or present positive or positive, they're confirmed in the laboratory, just like you do with hair test or with urine testing. It's the laboratory is going to follow the same procedures in terms of making sure that all the steps are followed in terms of being able to assure you as the employer, let's say, that the sample that you had tested and the result from it is accurate. The is going to collect about 1.5 inches of a sample of hair, which is going to have a 3-month history of drug use from that individual. Here's how it works. Okay, this may vary from donor to donor, but typically hair grows at a rate of about 1/2 inch a month. And you clip of about 1.5 inches at 1/2 inch a month, about 90 days or 3 months worth of history that you can look at in that sample. Okay, a bit different than head hair. Okay, it may cover a longer time frame. There's a lot of science going on there that is not absolutely conclusive yet. But we're talking about 1/2 inch a month. We're talking about taking 1.5 inches of a sample, which will give you about a 3-month or 90-day view into that person's drug use activity, if there's been any. Okay. Here's an important thing to know about hair testing. A week, somewhere, let's say it says 7 to 10 here, but I'm going to say 5 to 10 days, some in that neighborhood. Lag time between usage and when particular usage will be detectable in a hair sample. So an individual has never used drugs before, and they use drugs, and now they've had a sample of their hair taken after they use drugs. It's typically not going to be detectable in that hair sample. But later, that will be detectable in a sample of hair from that individual. But if about a chronic drug user or who uses drugs regularly, let's say every weekend, there's some pot, they're using cocaine, etc. Well, we're not concerned then about the ability to detect recent use. We're looking at a lifestyle vision of this individual, and it's going to be detectable because they're a regular user of drugs. So we're not worried about the lag time of 7 or 8, 9 days because this individual is using drugs all the time. Okay, from the laboratory, it's about the same as your urine lab-based oral fluid testing. 24 hours for a negative result, somewhere to about 72 hours typically for a bit of a result that has to be confirmed and then verified by an MRO. Okay, let's compare the different testing methods and their windows of detection. So see all the way to the left, that vertical line, that's the usage, okay? And then you see blood and oral fluid right there to the far left, start after the black line, which is immediately after the usage of the drug. There is a lag time. As you can see there, it says hours. So there's a lag time of about an hour or two, depends on the drug, a number of factors, but you're going to be able to detect immediately after somebody uses drugs with a urine sample. It's not going to be detectable in that urine sample. There's going to be a lag time of an hour or so. Fluid and blood, it's almost immediately after the use of the drug. Now, look a little bit farther to the right, you'll see the brain, and that's where hair testing starts. You can see it's not weeks or months. It's a matter of days from point of usage until that particular usage is detectable in their sample. But you can see where all of the others start to, the window of detection starts to close after a period of some days. Hair testing goes on for a period of months. So again, remember I said it's not of which testing method is right for you, or which testing method is best. It's which one is right for you. What for? Are you looking for a longer window of detection, or looking for immediate detectability, or are you looking for a combination of both? Think about this for a moment. You're conducting pre-employment drug testing, and you really want to know if somebody has a history of using drugs. They're going to be drug tested to get a job can abstain from using drugs for 3 or 4 days to pass a urine test and oral fluid test, right? They would be either a non-drug user or somebody who was able to abstain for 3 months prior to being tested for a job. So much harder to do if you're a chronic drug user, if you're a regular drug user, even if you use the misnomer casual drug user. Still hard to anticipate that 90 days from now I'm going to be drug tested for a job I don't even know about yet, so I'm going to abstain from using drugs. Maybe people who kind of try to game the system, but generally speaking, with hair testing, you have that wider detection, that wider window detection. And that's going to for you to get a long look into that individual's lifestyle, employment screen, and maybe what you want. Okay? Now, so those are some of the basics of hair testing. There are myths when it comes to hair testing. Some mission that's out there that's been lingering for many, many years that continues to be the case. In today's webinar, I did additional research over and beyond what I already have on hair testing, just to make sure I had sort of the latest information. I thought it was interesting. I was reading an article that we published in March of 2015, this month, that was promoting some misinformation, some myths about hair testing that have spelled for many, many years. So sometimes it's a matter of just continuing to put the message out there in front of people. Other times it's a matter of once you start doing it, you realize that that's just not the case. Okay? So I'm going to look at 3 specific areas of myths that continue to find a way out there, even into the media, into articles getting written by journalists that have been discredited, have been dispelled, that are not true when it comes to testing. You may not want to do hair testing, okay? But base it on these myths, because I'm going to share with you information that refutes these points. And I'll also say there are a number of places where you can get hair testing, okay, laboratories that do hair testing. I would go through a company like AWSI because they do all this homework for you. But you find information on the laboratory's websites, frequently questions about these various myths and whatnot. It's information. I don't dispute it. I work with some of these companies through Current Consulting Group, but I would trust a company like AWSI to answer those questions for you because they have a very vested interest in making sure that you're happy with the hair testing that you're going to be doing through them if they keep you as a client. So that's a good source of information, okay? But you can also find information on the laboratory websites as well. Now, in terms of science and whether the science of hair testing is sound, the answer is yes. You have to understand that in the United States, somewhat back by 30 years of lab-based urine testing standards that have been put in place. It's not a thing that these standards there, that urine testing is so popular, that so many people rely on it. That's a good thing, generally speaking. But in countries where their sort of culture of drug testing wasn't born out of quote-unquote DOT regulations, others, like hair testing, are not uncommon. In countries, testing and oral fluid testing in particular, those two testing methods are common, and in some places, the preferred testing method. And it's not they're and they don't understand the science. They do. They've done their homework just like we have. We're somewhat under, sort of this perception because of the DOT regulations that urine testing is the best testing method. Not necessarily better than other testing methods. It's just as good. Or conversely, hair testing is just as good. The science behind hair testing is equal to that of lab-based urine testing. And we're talking specifically here, at least for our purposes today, about lab-based testing. The technologies behind instant testing devices is a little bit different, and you have different parameters that come into play. So as I make these statements as a instant testing as well, I'm talking about lab-based testing. The science there are literally hundreds of studies and reports that have been published in peer-reviewed journals for decades now on testing and its comparability from a scientific standpoint to both urine and oral fluid testing, specifically urine testing. I mean, oral fluid testing providers and manufacturers compare themselves to urine testing as well, because that's the connection you want to make with people, is that this testing method, this alternative or advanced testing method, is comparable to the one that's out there that everybody knows about, which is urine testing. Studies have come from a wide variety of sources, but the bottom line, and as I say, there's hundreds. The government actually published a book that sort of brought, the best of all of these studies together into one book, and I don't even know if it's available anymore. I saw a copy of it from many years ago. In terms of sort of some of the ethnic bias that's sometimes falsely associated with hair testing, or testing's inability to detect certain drugs compared to urine testing, sort of dispelling those myths out there. But there are a lot of studies. You can find them on the internet now. You may be able to find them from some government sources. For example, the laboratories also does hair testing. The Department of Defense also relies on hair testing. And I want to point this out because when we talk about urine testing being the only testing method allowed by the government, we're really just talking about the DOT regulations. You have to understand that. Other federal agencies rely on other methods of drug testing. It's not lab-based urine testing. So the Department of Defense is a great example of that. The United Nations has actually developed guidelines for testing with hair, sweat, and saliva. These go back many, many years. The European Workplace Drug Testing Society, EWDTS, also has guidelines out there on testing for hair. As I mentioned, hair testing is I say, much more common, but certainly much sort of more people know more about hair testing, perhaps a good way to say it, in other countries. But there have been literally thousands of hair tests performed all over the world, and there's lots of information and data out there to support the efficacy of the science behind hair testing. And again, with every testing method, it becomes a matter of whether you do it right or not, okay? Now, what's the defensibility, the legal defensibility of hair testing or any testing method? You have to make that there's some consistency, that we're comparing apples to apples. And so legal world, and I'm not an attorney, but there's the Fry rule, the Federal Rules of Evidence, and the Daubert rule. These don't just apply to drug testing, of course. These are federal standards, or excuse me, legal standards that are used to determine whether something in court meets the standard of accuracy or defensibility. Does it meet the Fry rule? And by doing so, it can be used to make an argument in favor of, whatever it is that you're legally arguing in favor of, okay? Hair testing has passed that test. It is used successfully like, sort of the standard of the Fry rule or the Daubert rule, for example. So, expert testimony in these three standards of providing expert testimony, witness testimony, has passed that standard in the way that urine testing has. Okay. Now, again, you may find yourself in a situation where your provider, the provider that you use for hair testing, has to provide this type of legal support to you, and those companies will do that. The laboratories that provide the hair testing. But you want to make sure you're using a reputable agency or organization when it comes to setting up your program. That's why I recommend, rather than going straight to the laboratory, go through a provider who organizes and pulls all of that together for you. Now, technically biased. And this is the myths that I read in the article this morning as I was getting ready for today's presentation. The technical argument against hair testing was just a long time ago. So, but the myth is based on some truth. Okay, it's not truth that leads to a conclusion that hair testing is ethically biased, but there's in the fact that you see in that first bullet, drugs that are metabolized, they're metabolized differently depending on the individual, by gender, by their type of their body, the weight of their body, and the hair color. But there's over years and years of looking at this, there's been no significant difference between these factors through different drug testing methods, whether it's urine, oral fluid, or hair. So studies published on this in peer-reviewed journals, as I mentioned before, showing no significant impact based on the hair color or the of the individual. And these, studies that were done by the drug testing companies, these were studies that were done or funded by the federal government and published in the Federal Register. So even at that, though, to minimize the potential for some type of bias based on the type of hair, all testing methods, or various wash procedures, I should say, are employed before a hair sample is actually tested. And those washing procedures, typically using, again, reputable companies, right, are requirements that come from the Society of Hair Testing, the College of American Pathologists, CAP, or in some cases, the New York State Department of Health. Which you're thinking, why the New York State Department of Health? Well, there are a number of states that actually use the New York State Department of Health accreditation for moving laboratories in their states outside of New York. So that's a very reputable accreditation that a number of states rely on. Okay, current laboratories can also receive accreditation from CLIA accreditation, the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments, New York, as I mentioned, laboratory accreditation programs, and of course CAP, the College of American Pathologists. So what about urine testing? Remember I mentioned SAMHSA certification. That's very important if you're going to be testing in a laboratory for urine. You want a SAMHSA certified or a CAP certified type of laboratory. Or, as I mentioned, some states will allow it in New York Department of Health certification. When hair testing, you're also looking for a laboratory that's been certified. SAMHSA guidelines or regulations for drug testing only apply and only cover lab-based urine testing. So no SAMHSA certification technically for hair testing or for oral fluid testing for that matter. So you're looking for organizations that certify laboratories specifically for hair testing or have these types of certifications. And that's your safe ground, okay? The accreditation typically includes all of these things. So there's method agreement, the assessment of the impact of cosmetic use and applications, environmental contamination. That's where the washing procedures come into place. Washing any external, potentially external contamination in the sample. They're looking for drug cross-reactivity, the ability to sample storage, shipping stability, method procedure, and drug recovery studies. A particular laboratory to make sure that it can be accredited as being scientifically sound in doing hair testing. There are two very respected worldwide proficiency testing programs for hair testing laboratories. One is the Society of Hair Testing, and the German Society of Toxicological and Forensic Chemistry. Those may be things that you want to ask about when it comes to the laboratory that's doing your hair testing as well. As I mentioned, hair testing, like oral fluid testing, not in other countries. Not that it dominates the market in other countries, but very thought of, much commonly used in other countries. Now, here in the States, and that's all I can speak for, this particular slide, there are a number of industries that have really sort of caught the vision of hair testing. Trucking, manufacturing, the oil and gas industry, but a particular trucking industry. Now, outside of the workplace market, you'll find casinos, at one time very big into hair testing. To some extent, schools, more so private schools than public schools, because hair testing is a more expensive testing process compared to some types of urine testing, to some extent oral fluid testing as well. As I mentioned, there are federal agencies as well as local and state government agencies that hair testing or allow hair testing. But probably the one that has had, by far the most, I would say, acceptance of hair testing, where they've really found a way to utilize it, is the trucking industry. And so I've got some real good information coming up on that. And I'm seeing we're getting a number of questions in already. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section. We'll get as many as we can at the end of today's presentation. Some of your questions I'm probably answering as we go through the presentation. But if any questions that you have, and mention, I'm not really talking about the science so much. But if you have science questions, technology questions, want to compare different testing methods, please, by all means, include them in the Q&A, even if we don't get to it today, because maybe it's a very long, involved type of question that requires a long, involved answer. We'll get it for you. We'll make sure that you get some information to go along with your question there. So, on hair testing, and what to jump into combining the two into one program. Hair longest window of detection, by far compared to other testing methods. Remember this slide that we showed that compared the different windows of detection with blood, oral fluid, urine, and hair. Hair has that lag time of about, let's say, 7 days on average. But that 7th day, 7 days after the usage of drug, from 7, that window of detection is going to be open for about 90 days. So you've got about a 3-month window of detection with hair that you don't anywhere close to with urine and oral fluid, or with blood for that matter. Hair spends are virtually adulteration proof. I get this question all the time, right? Because I talk about the susceptibility to cheating. And what about testing? What about oral fluid testing? Well, there are a number of sites, as I mentioned, a million right now will offer you advice on how to cheat on a drug test. And on some of those websites, they'll offer information or products that you can purchase from them to cheat on a hair test. Those scientific proof that these shampoos or additives that they suggest putting in the hair actually will help you pass a test that you don't have any business passing. Iron hair, have that one. Again, no proof that these testing methods actually work. One website suggested that you stop using drugs and begin shampooing with their product. And of course, after a long period of time, 90 days, your test is negative as long as you don't use drugs again. So adulteration proof, I'm not going to say absolutely, but I'm going to say virtually. The procedure is typically safe, simple to do. Doesn't have to be done at a collection site, although most employers would continue to use professional collectors. But that is something that individuals in your employment would be trained to do as well. It is a scientific valid testing method, and it is admissible in court. And, actually be a great webinar to do just on the legal defensibility, the state laws, and how they apply to hair testing. But for another day. Now, combining these two different testing methods into a single program. What I've tried to do here is to sort of capture the basics on one slide, which I'll go through point by point, and share some information that specifically comes from companies that have successfully combined urine and hair testing. And so you can look at the statistics that they come up with to validate their conclusion or decision to combine the two testing methods. Okay? When it's urine testing, testing, I would advise you to, or with any drug testing program, highly advise you to check all applicable state laws. Remember, the federal regulations, the DT regulations, let's be specific, that's more accurate. The regulations currently right now do not permit any other testing method besides lab-based urine testing. And lab-based urine testing is legal in every state, not in urine testing, because there are some states that don't allow point-of-collection testing. But urine testing is legal in every state. There are some states that restrict hair testing in one or another. You may be a state with a voluntary drug testing law. How would it be voluntary? Well, in some states, they have enacted laws that are voluntary, but offer incentive to the employer to be in that program. Here in Florida, for example, we have a voluntary state law offers to those who participate in the program a 5% discount in their workers' compensation premiums. If I'm in the program here in Florida, I could qualify for a 5% discount on my workers' comp premiums, but I have to drug test in accordance with the guidelines put out by the state. There are some states with these voluntary laws that allow hair testing. Ohio is a good example of that. Why? Because Ohio essentially punts on drug testing procedures and defers straight to 49 CFR Part 40. So without taking into account the scientific validity and legal defensibility of hair testing, they just simply punt the issue and defer to Part 40. Fair, not fair, that's for you to decide. But out of the voluntary law in Ohio, there is no restriction on hair testing. So while there are restrictions in some states on hair testing, particularly in these states with voluntary workers' comp premium discount laws, there will not be any restriction on testing outside of that voluntary law. So you have to check all the applicable laws. And of course, as Sammy mentioned at the very beginning, services that we provide is statedrugtestinglaws.com. I'm not pitching that, but one of the things we get asked on our website all the time, because if you're a subscriber, you can submit your questions. One of the questions you get all the time is, I'm in multiple states, which law applies to me? And the answer to that is all of them. So if you're in 20 different states, you need to check 20 state laws to make sure that you can do hair testing and how to do it in all 20 of those states. And there may be some restrictions that apply to urine testing as well. There are when it comes to things like how collection will take place, chain of custody protocol, split specimen, certain laboratory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So check the applicable state laws, which one applies to you. Every state that you're in, that state law applies to you. And then you're going to want to modify your drug testing policy to make sure that it is consistent with what you're now doing. You want it to reflect the fact that you're doing hair and urine testing, and in circumstances you're going to be doing each testing method. Okay, say you're doing hair testing for pre-employment and random, and doing urine testing for post-accident and reasonable suspicion. Okay, you're asked to state that. You need to be as clear as possible, because when somebody comes back to challenge a drug test result, you want to be able to go straight to the policy, which that individual, that former employee, has access to, and say, it's right here in the policy. You signed this document saying you read the policy and you understand it. Therefore, what's your complaint, right? But it's got to be in the policy. Never underestimate the power of a well-written drug testing policy that includes all the different state law requirements as addendums to your base policy. That's very, very important. And then you're going to train supervisors, you're going to inform employees, and you're going to make sure that if this is a change to your policy, they're complying with any state law requirements for advance notification of a change to your policy. And that's in some states. Missouri is a good example of that. Okay, here's really some very, very interesting stuff. And some of this type is a little small, so allow me to walk you through it. This comparison of urine and hair test results from nearly 1,000 individuals who were tested both for hair and DT urine tests on the same individual. We're talking about not comparison of some people here who were tested with hair and some people over there who were tested with urine. These were DOT urine test subjects who were tested for hair. Okay, this was between 2006 and 2014 by J.B. Hunt, the trucking company. The first box up there at the top. It is with yes out of that total, 578 for a positivity rate of less than 1%. Hair, however, remember they're testing the same people. that gives of nearly 4,000, 3,923 positives, positive 5.5. Look at the positivity rates that come out relative to DOT drug testing. You see that it's 1%, 1.5%, this, that, and the other thing. Just know that some of those people got past urine test. They tested positive, but they didn't test positive with urine. Their test, in the case of this JB Hunt program, actually had far more positives than the urine test did. Now it's below that. Negative both tests, 6,923. So 94.3% of all the tests were negative. Positive refused to take the test on both tests, 489, 4.69%. Positive or refused to test for urine only, 9 individuals. Positive or refused to test for hair, 3,434. That is a big difference. That there's so much clamor now to get DOT to allow, or SAMHSA to allow, hair testing. And you can see on the far right over there, well, the two white boxes there, positives for urine only by drug, vast majority were marijuana. Positives for hair only, the vast majority were cocaine. Interesting, isn't it? Because when you look at the statistics SAMHSA that come out every year, the National on Drug Use and Health, it's marijuana is the #1 drug of abuse, and the abuse of psychotherapeutic drugs, you know, the sedatives, et cetera, that people abuse, prescription drugs, as the #2 category of drug abuse, and cocaine being #3. For years, cocaine was always #2. It has, the last 5 or so years, slipped down to #3. But in this analysis of positives for hair only, it is #1 drug being detected with hair testing. This is an interesting slide. I think we'd all agree with that. But there's a little bit more to kind of make the case. So a number of national trucking companies have actually combined urine testing and compliance with DOT regulations and hair testing of their own company authority for random and post-accident, or for accident and random. I'm just going to focus on the pre-employment right there in the middle. So the second column over that says pre-employment UA, urine testing, positive percentage. You can see with Schneider, for example, it was 0.34, but pre-employment with hair testing, the positives were 4.1. With JB Hunt, 0.16 compared to 5.59. And down the line. Look at CR England, 2.9% under urine, 11.06% under hair. It just shows to really sort of underscore the science of hair testing, and the fact that under some circumstances, a pre-employment test being an example, you're getting more positives with hair testing than you might under normal circumstances with testing. I'm been a little long-winded today. I apologize. We're starting to run out of time, and a couple more slides with some really good info. So let me go with you real quick before we do run out of time. This is a case study that's being done. Hair test post-dilute urine specimens. Okay, this was from 2013 to current date. Let me explain what this is. So this was a study in 159 dilute samples. Specimens, 359. The total on a hair test after dilute urine were 35. The total results on our after dilute urine was 21, so a total of 62. The percent of positive hair results following negative urine dilute. So this is a negative urine dilute following hair test. The total rate of those individuals was near 10%. So a significant percentage of urine dilutes are positive. Positive come out positive with a different testing methodology, in this case hair testing, or specifically hair testing. The positive hair results and following a negative urine dilute. These are individuals who refuse to be tested. The positive rate was 17.27%. So the reason, right, people will refuse to be drug tested based on, their moral conviction that hair testing or drug testing perhaps is an invasion of privacy, and employers don't have that right. Bottom line, employers do have that right. Percentage of those individuals will test positive, the hair test. than those who have a negative urine dilute. This is fascinating information because what it tells us is there are a lot of people who are getting past the drug test result or the drug test because they're not testing under some circumstances with a testing method that's likely to do that drug use in that individual. Now, I got some exciting stuff I want to share with you. So earlier this month, in March 2015, on March 19th, a group and members of the House of Representatives introduced legislation that allowed trucking companies to use hair testing as a urine testing in committee regulations. And there, in the second paragraph, is the list of the Congress who introduced this legislation. Actually, what we found with the slides above, so you're trucking companies that are performing the urine test to complete the DOT regulations, and they're doing it at whatever that expense is. Whatever dollars out of pocket that requires, they're doing it, and they're complying with the DOT regulations. Company authority in states where there are no restrictions, of course, which is the most states, they're all at their own expense conducting hair tests. They're doing both. They're spending more money on the drug test as a whole, getting more positives. So they're themselves in a position to hire individuals who passed the urine test but failed the hair test and who are drug users. Now, yourself on the one hand, that's costing them a lot more money to do that. True. But according to a U.S. Navy study, every user in your employment is costing you at least $7,000 a year. And that's in a couple of very narrow categories that the Navy studied. They didn't look at accidents, compensation claims, things of that nature, which can be expensive. So end up hiring 100 individuals because the hair test, even though those hair tests maybe have cost you, let's say, $60 just to pick a number, in addition to what you paid for the urine test, but you saved $7,000 per individual by not hiring them, you've come way ahead. But what this legislation is proposing to do is to take that additional cost burden off of the shoulders of these trucking companies by them to use either method approved under the DOT regulations. Well, there's a lot to that, obviously. And here's a quote from the American Trucking Associations, and I put this on there. You can read it at your leisure. But there's a lot to make that happen. But the ball is moving its way down the field when it comes to hair testing. Now, I mentioned earlier, lab-based oral fluid testing is also making progress as well. This thing for companies that are mandated under the DOT regulations to be able to do both or all testing methods if they chose to, but in this case to do urine and hair testing. When done right, both methods are accurate from a scientific standpoint, defense from a legal standpoint, and can help a company significantly increase their return on investment from drug testing. Various states that place restrictions on hair testing, although there are some, but for the most part, in combination with urine testing, you do both in most states. I think the future of drug testing is something like this. As I've been in the industry for over 25 years, I've been saying for a long time, as have other people, I'm not the only one, that it's really going to be a combination of testing methods and sciences that are eventually used by employers in particular, but other entities that do drug testing. Because it's a matter of choosing the best testing method that's best, it's choosing a method that's best for you. In some cases, perhaps in many cases, it's going to be a combination of methods. It's a combination of urine and hair testing, as we do today. Questions? I think I'm out of time. As I go through these questions, I've answered a lot of them. Let me just say that we will make these PowerPoint slides available to you. You will also receive a link to the recording of today's presentation so that you can go through it again, you can share it with your coworkers, etc. But if you have any specific questions that we did not answer during today's presentation, let us know. We'll get those answers to you. And I will relinquish the microphone, so to speak.
SI, we hope you found today's presentation informative and helpful. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording. Thank you for your attendance today. This concludes today's webinar.